The 19th century in Latin America, after the War of Independence, was marked both Sirac for philosophical and political models that could guide the formation of stable and prosperous nations. In the context, Positivism emerged as the dominant philosophy, offering a seemingly practical and scientific framework for achieving the diverse goals of the new countries. Positivism's emphasis on scientific methods, rational thinking, and empirical observation promised a path to progress through reason and science, which resonated strongly with leaders seeking to modernize their nations. The motto "Order and Progress," which adorned Brazil's flag, captured the essence of positivist aspirations in Latin America, symbolizing the belief that social stability was prerequisite for national development, both achieved through scientific understanding and application. Latin America positivism derived from a peculiar mixture of European ideas, mainly from the thought of Auguste Comte, Herbert Spencer, and Ernst Haeckel. However, this philosophy was not adopted homogeneously across the region, undergoing different adaptations and interpretations in different national contexts, reflecting the unique social and political realities of each country. One of the hallmarks of positivism was its criticism of the colonial legacy and the influence of the Catholic Church, which were seen by many positivists as obstacles to progress. Positivism offered a secular alternative to the dominant Catholic worldview, criticizing traditional institutions and proposing a social organization based on science and reason.
Positivism manifested itself in different ways in different Latin America countries. In Brazil, the positivist movement was particularly strong and organized, even establishing a positivist church. The influence of positivism was so profound that it played a significant role in the proclamation of the Republic in 1889, with the positivism motto being incorporated into the national flag. In Mexico, positivism became intrinsically linked to the authoritarian regime of Porfirio Diaz, the Patriot. The scientific group technocratic advisors embraced positivist ideals to justify their policies of modernization and social order, although this application of positivism often led to authoritarian practices and the marginalization of certain social groups. In countries such as Argentina, Chile, and Cuba, positivism was used as an ideological tool for liberal reforms and modernization efforts, with intellectuals and leaders seeing this philosophy as a means of implementing social change and reducing the influence of the Catholic Church. Economic conditions in Latin America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries played a crucial role in the rise of Marxism. The region's economies were predominantly primary exports, highly dependent on the export of raw materials to industrialized nations, which made them vulnerable to global market fluctuations. While foreign investment has driven some economic growth and the expansion of infrastructure such as railroads and ports, it has also increased foreign influence and control over Latin American economies. Despite some economic progress, social inequality and widespread poverty persisted, creating fertile ground for ideologies that advocated social change. Urbanization led to the growth of the urban working class, which faced new forms of exploitation and social problems, making it receptive to Marxist ideas that criticized capitalist exploitation and defended workers' rights. The political conditions of the time also contributed significantly to the of Marxism. Many Latin American countries were governed by oligarchy and authoritarian regimes, where political power was concentrated in the hands of a small elite, limiting the political participation of the majority of the population. Foreign intervention, mainly from the United States and European powers, exerted considerable influence in Latin American politics, often in support of regimes that favored their economic interests. Political instability and internal conflict were common in many nations, generating a desire for radical social and political change. In this context, several opposition movements rose, including liberal reforms, radical intellectuals, and labor organizations, which challenged the existing political order and defended social and political reforms. Some movements, often inspired by socialist and anarchist ideas, prepared the ground for the later adoption of Marxism as a more comprehensive ideology of social transformation. The first influence of Marxism in Latin America can be traced back to the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, with the arrival of European immigrants. These immigrants, Manu one were already involved in labor movements in their home countries, introduced the first references to Marxist socialism, although the term socialism was not entirely new on the continent. Several traditions of critical thought were already circulating in Latin America, including popular liberalism and romantic socialism. The circulation of texts by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, such as Communist Manifesto and The Capital, also played a fundamental role in the dissemination of these ideas, being translated and reaching a wider audience. The first socialist and workers' organizations emerged during this period, providing platforms for the dissemination and discussio of Marxist ideas. Among the main authors who introduced and adapted Marxism to the Latin American context, José Carlos Mariátegui in Peru stands out. Your work 7 Essays on the Interpretation of Peruvian Reality is considered a pioneer in the application of Marxist analysis to the specific social, economic, political and cultural reality of Latin America, with particular emphasis on the role of indigenous communities. Mariátegui argued for the need for a socialism that was not a mere copy of the European model, but rather a heroic creation, rooted in local conditions and traditions. Another important thinker was Juan Bautista Justo in Argentina, who produced the first complete translation of the Capital into Spanish directly from German and founded the Argentine Socialist Party, contributing to the consolidation of Marxism among workers and intellectuals. In addition to these, other relevant thinkers and works helped to disseminate Marxist ideas in the first decades of the 20th century, including the first translation of the Communist Manifesto published in Works newspaper and the writhing of other socialists who sought to apply Marxist analysis to their local context. The final decades of the 20th century also witnessed the founding of the first communist parties in Latin America, inspired by the Russian Revolution of 1917. The Communist Party of Argentina was founded in 1918, followed by parties in Mexico 1919, Uruguay 1920, Chile 1922, and Brazil 1922. The Third International Comintern played a significant role in the formation and guidance of these parties, although its influence was not always homogeneous and generated ideological debates and divergences, such as the division between Stalinism and Trotskyism. The Comintern sought to align Latin American communist parties with Moscow's political line, which sometimes led to tension and complex adaptation to local realities.
Marxism exerted a profound influence on various social movements and political currents in Latin America. In the labor and union movements, Marxism provided a powerful tool for analyzing capitalist exploitation, allowing workers to understand power dynamics and the need for collective organization. Marxist ideas inspired country strikes and struggles for labor rights, leading to the formation of confederation and trade union centers with a Marxist orientation in several countries in the region. In the peasant and agrarian movements, Marxism offered a critical analysis of the agrarian questions and exploitation in the countryside, resonating with demands for agrarian reform and peasants' rights. The figure of José Carlos Mariátegui is particularly relevant in this context, as he integrated the struggle of indigenous movements into Marxist analysis, recognizing the revolutionary potential of indigenous communities and defending a socialism that considered their specificities. Among student and intellectual movements, Marxism became a fundamental theoretical reference for social and political criticism. Students influenced by Marxism actively participated in university ref movements and engaged in broader political struggles. The Marxism influence was also manifested in intellectual and artistic production, permeating literature, visual arts, and music, reflecting social criticism and revolutionary aspirations. The relationship between Marxism and liberation theology is another important aspect. Liberation theology, which emerged in Latin America in the 1960s and 1970s, incorporated Marxist social analysis to understand and address poverty and injustice. This approach generated debates and controversies about the compatibility between Marxism and Christianity, but it also encouraged a more active social engagement by the Church in favor of the poor and oppressed. The rise of Marxism in Latin America coincided with the Cold War period, a geopolitical context marked by the dispute between the United States and the Soviet Union. The national security doctrine, widely disseminated by the United States, saw Marxist influence as a threat to its hegemony and encouraged the rise of anti-communist military regimes throughout the region. Military interventions in Latin America were often a direct reaction to the growing influence of Marxist ideologies and movements perceived as threats to the established order and interest of the United States. The United States has played a significant role in supporting military coups, often financing on orchestrating the overthrow of democratically elected governments with socialist or Marxist leanings. Several philosophical elements of Marxism were perceived as threats by military regimes and their supporters' Marxism's fundamental critique of capitalism and its advocacy of social revolution directly challenged existing socioeconomic and political structures. The emphasis on the class struggles and workers' organization was seen as a destabilizing force, capable of generating social conflicts and threatening the established order. Furthermore, the anti-imperialism inherent in Marxism and its alignment with nationalism were considered threats by foreign powers with interest in the region. The impact of military interventions on Marxist movements was devastating. Military regimes implemented systematic repression, with persecution, arrest, torture, and murders of Marxist militants and leaders. Many Marxist intellectuals and activists were forced into exile to escape persecution. In some cases, Marxist movements responded to repression with armed struggles to overthrow authoritarian regimes and implement their revolutionary projects.
Several specific philosophical elements of Marxism have had a significant impact on Latin American thought. Historical and dialectical materialism provide a powerful lens to analyze the history of the region from the perspective of material conditions and class struggle, contrasting with idealism and metaphysics. This approach allowed for a deeper understanding of the roots of Latin America's social and economic problems. Surplus value theory and the critique of capitalist exploitation also had a major impact, offering an analysis of labor exploitation and capital accumulation that resonated strongly in the region's context of economic inequality. This theory contributed to the formation of class consciousness among workers and peasants, boosting organization and the fight for their rights. The concept's class struggle has become central to understanding social and political dynamics in Latin America, emphasizing the struggle between explorers and exploited as the driving force of history. This concept fostered political and social mobilization around class identity, leading to the formation of parties, unions, and peasant organization based on their class interest. Finally, dependency theory and the concept of imperialism, strongly influenced by Marxism, offered an analysis of the unequal relations between central and peripheral countries, explaining the persistent underdevelopment of Latin America in the context of global capitalism. This criticism of neocolonialism and the influence of foreign powers resonated with nationalist sentiments and movements that sought greater autonomy and sovereignty for the region. Marxism profoundly impacted several social movements, from workers and peasants to students and intellectuals, offering a theoretical framework for understanding exploitation and the struggle for social justice. His influence also extended to liberation theology, which incorporated of Marxist also generated social analysis to address poverty and oppression. However, the rise of Marxism also generated strong reactions, especially in the context of the Cold War, leading to military interventions and the repression of Marxist movements and organizations in many Latin America countries. In contrast to Positivism, which attracted mainly intellectual and political elites with the premise of modernization and order, Marxism resonated with marginalized groups and those who criticized the established order. Although Positivism left a legacy of valuing science and state planning, authoritarian tendencies are widely criticized today. Marxism, in turn, continues to be a relevant tool for social analysis and a source of inspiration for social political movements in Latin America, although its application and adaptations to the regional context remain the subject of debate and discussion. The legacy of Marxism in Latin America is therefore complex and enduring, shaping the region's political and social identity and continuing to influence understanding of its contemporary challenges.